When humans first joined the galactic community, nobody thought too much about them. Nobody thought that maybe these Deathworlders were worth anything, as most Deathworlders don't last more than a century off their own world. But eventually, humans made their way across by being, well, as they would put it, nice and friendly, and a bunch of other words that go with that. And it was true. Humans, whenever you meet them, are initially very respectful unless you meet them at the wrong time. As they say, I'm having a bad day, or I'm in a mood, whatever the hell a mood is. But being a Deathworlder myself, I decided I would give them a chance. So when they first came to the academy, I saw one that was about my age, apparently. However, as it turns out, he was younger, much younger. As it turns out, Deathworlders do not age nearly as fast as we do. But it did surprise me still. All in all, being from a Class 3 Deathworld myself, I figured one from a Class 5 was not going to be too much of a difference. I went up and introduced myself by simply raising my claw, placing it on my abdomen, and lowering my head as a sign of respect. The human looked at me, turned its head a little bit. I thought this was a greeting. It seemed to be thinking for a moment, and then stuck its big gargantuan paw out towards me. I was surprised at this. This thing was actually bigger than I realized now that I look at it up close. It seemed to look at me, look at its hand, look at me, look at its hand again, and then I reciprocated the action. He reached over, grabbed my hand, squeezed it, and I felt the power inside this human as it lifted and shut my hand down quick once, and simply responded, "Hi, my name's Roy." I was surprised at this when he let my hand down. I would learn later that this was just a standard greeting that they did when they met new people. It was a way of showing that you are friendly and nice. And for the most part, Roy was friendly and nice. But it seemed as though he never took time off. It is very common for most species to take as much relaxation time as possible, though when it is time to work, it is absolutely time to work. You do not discuss anything with them. But humans seem to work constantly and talk constantly. It is as though they can manifest a separate conversation along with the work they're doing. It's confused us all, but I eventually learned how to do it. When I showed my family that I could do this, they were all confused, as it would take a long time for them to understand this. However, this was not the most interesting part of the humans. It was one of the things that Roy would spend a lot of time in the gymnasium. In particular, this area he called the weights room. I did not quite understand this, but he spent much of his time moving around heavy objects in different ways, moving his arms above his head, moving them around to the side, flexing his legs, doing strange calisthenics that I did not understand. And when he was done, you could see that he was always on the floor, gasping for air. I ran in once to try and ask him what was wrong and suddenly hit the ground, realizing that the gravity was set almost twice what my gravity was, and I was not ready for it. He immediately got up, still sweating profusely, which was honestly gross, as humans when they sweat do not smell all that good. However, Roy told me that when humans sweat off what they call fat, yes, the extra layer of insulation of most creatures, they tend to stink. I took this in stride, as we would end up being roommates, and I had smelled this smell plenty of times when he came back from his weights room and headed straight towards the water closet so that he could be cleansed. He spent a lot of time cleansing himself. Not only that, but he would also straighten that fur he had on his head. I didn't understand this, as I rubbed my claw over my feathers on top of my head and down my neck. It was strange. I didn't quite get it, but whatever. They were human. They were other Deathworlders, so we did, aside from that, get along just fine. We seem to have similar sense of humor once we understand each other's slang terms, as they call it. But that was not the most interesting part either. What was interesting is one time we had some days off, and I expected Roy to spend all his time studying, or in the weights room, or in the engineering department, or anything else. But no, he decided he was going to go home. He said he was going to do some sort of activity with friends. And seeing that I had time off, I asked if I could join him. Roy hesitated for a moment, looked me up and down, and said, "I don't know if you would enjoy this so much." With that, I simply grinned, a human gesture, showing my teeth. In my culture, it would be a sign of a fight about to happen. But I showed my teeth and said, "I can deal with anything you can. And anything you can do, I know I can do better than you." A phrase I picked up from one of their god-awful earthly songs. But it was one thing that seemed to motivate Roy to push himself even harder, to study even more, and yes, he did catch up to me in grades, although it's kind of hard to surpass someone who gets perfect scores. As we ended up in his system, I looked and I could see not only the blue and green marble, but we passed by another planet. Very close. The ship seemed to slow down a little bit so we could get a better look. This strange giant full of gas with several rings around it. It was beautiful, and everyone said so. Many people took other different digital photographs of it. I didn't understand why. Can't you just download a picture? Others stood there making gestures with their hands, with their faces, as they held their photographic devices up and made sure they got a picture of the planet in the background. We were only around that planet for about an hour before they spun up the engines again, and once again we were next to a planet, but not the green and blue ball, but no, this was a red planet. I was confused. Wasn't their planet lush and green and full of water? Roy simply said, "Don't worry, this isn't Earth. If this was Earth, I'd be crying." You would weep over a planet. Over your home planet? You bet your ass. Why would I bet my gluteus on something? More human slang. The translator was having a little bit of trouble on this, so I figured I would let it go. More people took more of the still photographs, while others took video of them, admiring the view. And again, the engines spun up after another hour, and soon we were close to his home planet. Taking the shuttle down was not fun. The harnesses were not designed for my species, as my tail had to be tucked in behind my back, which was extremely uncomfortable for the entire ride down. The harness itself pulled in tight, and most of my scales and feathers were pinched inside the harness. The worst part was the piece that came up between my legs. I did not expect to shift and crush parts of me that I wanted to remain uncrushed. However, the pain was fleeting, but it was enough where I was walking a little off as we exited the shuttle. As we did, Roy introduced me to his family unit. He showed that his parents were there, along with several of his siblings, all of which invited him in. Many of them looked extremely young. It was odd. I was told that the parents were, by my estimation, so old they should be great-grandparents, yet they looked so young to me. I didn't understand this, but I wouldn't push the matter much further. Eventually, they started talking about the event that we were going to, and that I would have to be in the right attire to do so. Going shopping with Roy's sister was an event in and of itself, as she insisted on putting me in different attire that was not even designed specifically for the event we were going to. Yet she seemed to enjoy it very much, so I dealt with it. Many times I was embarrassed, as a few people would snap photographs of me and comment odd things. It's though they had not seen one of my kind before, yet I know that my kind visits their planet on the regular basis. Yet I just decided to go with it, as she had that strange smile, showing teeth again. At first I did cringe a little bit, thinking that she was going to jump at me and try to take a bite out of me, but no. She was fine. She enjoyed everything, and eventually was starting to give me a hug and saying how cute and how lovely and how Certain things accent other things. I did not know I spoke with an accent, but it didn't matter. When we were done with the shopping for clothing, we ended up going to another place. She said she had to pick up a few items, and as we sat there, she asked me if I ever used something called make up. I wasn't sure what it was, but the smell of it was tinging my nostrils something fierce. And thankfully, Roy grabbed me by the arm, spun me around, and said, "No, no, he's a guy. You don't use make. He's a guy. Don't go by the colors of the feathers. He's a guy. Okay? This is the way they are." I was confused on this, and it wasn't long to figure out that makeup was used to accentuate items on the females. It was very quickly apparent as the person behind the counter explained it to me in rapid succession, so fast that I actually had to ask her to slow down her words as I was having trouble comprehending what she was saying, not to mention the translator was having issues. Thankfully, we wouldn't have to worry about too long because we went back to his domicile and had a meal with his family, and the next day we would be off to our event. I wondered about this event as everyone was joking about it. It was a different type of event that's been going on for several dozen of their years. I was a little tired myself of hearing about it, but I was more tired of the fact that their days were much, much longer than mine. Theirs was a 24-hour day. Ours was only 15. So it was difficult for me to stay awake and stay entwined in the conversation. But eventually, I would be brought to a room with a rather pleasant smell and a very pleasant place to sleep. They had adjusted things to go with my biology, which I greatly appreciated. What I did not appreciate is the next day, hearing Roy clanging some sort of metal on the ground. I got up and hurried out to see what was wrong as I could hear him groaning. I looked out and he was doing some sort of, what he said, light workout. I didn't understand it. I knew we were going for a physical activity, but why was he straining himself already on this? He simply insisted that I stretch, or else I would be in some serious trouble. I didn't know there was going to be some sort of police or constable there. What would I get in trouble about? He simply did this strange noise which I recognize as a human chuckle, and then simply brought me over and said, "Do as I do." We did end up stretching out our muscles. I have done this before, as we have regular physical education classes, and stretching is important. It's just I do not spend as much time as he does. Eventually, we got ready, and not only were his siblings ready to go, but also several of his friends. We showed up approximately 2 hours later to the middle of I have no idea where. It was in the countryside. I looked around, and many people were surprised to see me there, as it was almost entirely humans. We saw a few other species there, but very few, most of which were known as the very stronger species. Even though I am from a Deathworld, I am not physically as strong as they are. Many of these herbivore species are just very large and very, very strong, due to the topography of their own worlds. So we simply got ready. It took a while to get everything registered, and then we got at the starting gate. I was told this wouldn't be a race, we simply had to finish. That was all. Just finish? We didn't have to run or anything? Okay. I'm gonna take my time, and I will take all day. At least, that was the idea. But after the motivational speech, they had most of the humans jumping up and down, getting ready, and they were just screaming and yelling and chanting away. Suddenly, they sent off some sort of explosive. A small burst went through the air, and everyone just ran through the start gate and gone straight to the first obstacle. This would be what they called an obstacle course. Every so often, there would be some sort of obstacle we would have to navigate, and I would be feeling it the whole way. I was not ready to sprint, even though I had stretched. I had not bounced around like many of them did, as they said, to get the blood flowing. I didn't understand this. But as we ran to the first obstacle, we realized we had to carry each other. I was not ready for this. Roy was very heavy. Thankfully, they teamed me up with his younger sister, which only weighed a third of his weight, but it was still almost more than my body could handle. As soon as we got to the midway point, we had to switch. I thought for sure my body weight was just about ready to crush her, but no. She simply knelt down, grabbed a hold of me, threw me over her shoulder, and ran as fast as she could. She actually beat Roy to the other side, and he didn't even swap. It was strange. What? And she was laughing. That strange laugh. And smiling, yelling, "Hurry up, you slow poking..." What? Why would I poke somebody slow? You're supposed to poke someone fast. It didn't make any sense. But she seemed to be waving that everyone had to keep running. Why were we trying to keep up with the group? We didn't have to. We simply had to finish. We didn't have to run. But everyone insisted on running. Everyone was breathing hard, and I was almost out of breath by the time we even got to the second obstacle. Oh, dear Lord, we had to climb up some steep hills, climb over these ropes. My muscles were screaming before we even reached the hour mark. And yet more and more were still screaming, "Come on, you can do it, you got this, come on." Oh, I hope I got this. As we went over an obstacle where we had to climb up these strange ladders, which were set at only about a 10-degree angle, but we had to use our arms. Down below was a water obstacle. I was more than willing to not deal with it. They said, if you want to, you can go around, but everyone was going to take notice, and everyone was going to call you out by insults, among other things. You had two choices: either go up the ladder and down the other side, or fall in the water. I was so hot at that point, I figured water is my natural habitat. As I dropped down in and splashed in, it felt wonderful. But as I went across at the chest-deep high water, I looked up and I could see Roy and his sister basically racing, using their hands to go across this ladder. Why are they doing this? This is insane. There was other ones where there was a strange flora that was wrapped up in giant cylinders that we had to climb over. Yet it seemed like all the humans were helping each other. They would give each other boosts. They gave me a boost and lifted me over, helping pull me up over top. Everybody was helping each other, but I was screaming. I looked and I asked whenever we got water, "Is everyone okay? Because I'm hurting." They all would say, "We're all hurting." And yet they still had that strange human smile. What is wrong with these humans? Seriously, what is wrong with you? You do stuff that hurts you every day, and now you come out here for fun and hurt yourself? I don't get it. And yet we still kept going. We got to one obstacle towards the end, and as we looked in, I saw there was ice on top. I knew this was going to be cold. Roy actually stopped and put his hand on my chest, stopping me solid, and said, "You don't have to do this one." In pure seriousness. The only time he had been serious all day. He even looked up at those who were running the obstacle, and they simply nodded yes. I knew the human gesture. They understood that I was a cold-blooded species. But I figured, as hot as I was, this was going to be very good. This was going to feel wonderful. As many of those on the other side, even though they were shivering as they came out, were constantly saying how good it felt to cool down. My blood was boiling as the sun was beating down on my feathers. Everything was matted down with all sorts of perspiration. So I insisted on climbing up and continuing. I jumped in right next to Roy, but he told me to make sure I jump far enough that as I go down, I go underneath the piece of wood in front of us and then come up on the other side, so that as I step out, I can simply climb out. I didn't care at this point. I figured I would just jump in. He didn't know what he was talking about. He was not a species that came from an ice world. How would he know how to handle this stuff? So I simply jumped straight in and the ice immediately went towards my core, and I immediately started slowing down. I climbed slowly in the neck-deep water as I went towards the piece of wood. I reached up under to the other side, thinking there was going to be a wall there, but there wasn't. You had to go underneath the wood. I put my hand under, ducked down, holding my breath, and brought myself up on the other side. And as I surfaced, I looked, and the first time in a while, Roy had fear in his eyes. He was right there. He grabbed a hold of me, didn't even give me a chance to walk. and simply yanked me towards the other side, where other humans were waiting with their arms down. I tried to raise my arms, but I was starting to get too cold. I was starting to get sleepy. Very tired. Yoink! Out of the water I came, and they started hitting me with all sorts of fabric. This fabric was most likely there just to dry people off. Roy pulled out, and I could see that his skin was already starting to change to a white and then a blue because he had been in for a while. He simply got up, stretched his arms out to the side, and went, "Oh, that hurt!" But then he looked at me, smiled again, and said, "You ready for the next one?" Good great maker, what is wrong with these humans? He started down the ramp and started yelling, "Come on, running will warm me up." With that, he was right. It did start to warm me up, even though I was staggering most of the way. His sister actually lifted me up at one point to keep me on my feet. Roy stopped as he was there waiting and then helped me to the next obstacle. By the time we got to the end, I was beyond exhausted. So tired I could barely stand. The ice had simply gone away as the temperature here was just so hot. Oh, it was so bad. But we had one more obstacle to go. We could not go through the extra obstacles as you needed to do this several times before they would allow you to. Even though Roy and his sister were both able to do so, as they had the markings wrapped around their wrists to show that they could go, they insisted on staying with me. All the others in our group went to the extra obstacles. As I looked over, it turns out they were actually going through fire. What? They're trying to burn themselves? What? Humans are insane! What is wrong with you? As we got to the very end, we saw different pieces of metal hanging down, as well as several pieces of flora that were wrapped up in bundles that we would have to run through and step over. We were informed that they had electric current going through each of those wires. I stuttered as I did not want to feel any electric current. That would put me on the ground. Roy simply looked as, "No pain, no gain," and simply grabbed me by the waist, picked me up, ducked my head down, and then informed me, "Cover your face!" and then held an arm up in front of his face as he bolted as fast as he could through, jumping over each of those bounding flora. I could feel the jolt on my tail and also on my arm as those low voltage wires just hit. And oh, we got to this other side, and there were cheers. Humans were cheering. "Yeah, you got through, yeah." I was amazed at this. Roy simply put me down, turned and waited for the rest to come through. And when they did, we ran to the finish line, and all he said is, "Okay, we're done. Where's the beer?" Humans are beyond insane. This is crazy. What? Now I know my body cannot handle ethyl alcohol at all, so I couldn't enjoy this. But they did put some sort of colored drink in my hand. Come to find out, it is loaded with electrolytes and water, and I simply took the top off, opened my mouth, and upended it. To my surprise, many folks pulled out their digital devices and started taking pictures of me as I was doing this. Along with this, they supplied us with what I would know as a bar full of protein. I asked if it was a solid hunk of meat, which is what I really, really wanted. But no, it was unfortunately covered in chocolate and other confections. This apparently is palatable to humans, but would make me violently ill, so I couldn't enjoy it. Thankfully, some of those that had stayed behind had set up something specifically for me, and it was wonderful as they gave me something called sirloin. Oh, that tasted so good. But I was in too much pain to truly enjoy it. As I looked back to Roy, his family, and his friends, they were all happy, talking about how they had bled, they had ripped themselves open, how they got hit with electricity, how they went through fire, how they fell into water, how they had to trudge through ice, how they had to climb through the mud and end up face first in it, and yet they were laughing. D- wh- why? Why did these... I know I'm from a death world, but why do these death worlds enjoy... Why do they love pain so much? You masochistic, motherless